So first, I'd like to start with that personal sabbatical. How in the world did you muster the courage to take a leave from academia? It sounds so different from embarking on your career in a tenure track position. And I'm wondering, how was it different? What kinds of things did you learn about yourself? And maybe a little bit about the challenges. And you can answer one or all of the questions.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So I think anytime anybody talks about wanting to leave a job or taking a break, especially in academia, that moment is scary, because you're being asked to imagine yourself outside of everything that you believe that you've been prepared for. And so, that moment of realizing, this might just be something that I need to do for myself, was definitely a scary one, because you have to think about all of the other factors, right, that is tied to that decision. So for example, if you're thinking about how the personal sabbatical is going to affect your personal life, like financials and your income, things like health insurance, right? If you're single or you're married, you have to think about how your dependents might be affected by your choice. And then there's also that moment where you have to think about how the year off is going to affect your professional career. So in many ways, part of stepping away is going to be measured by your productivity, even if you're not working, right? So not taking that year off meant that, like, I didn't have an institutional affiliation. It meant that that I wasn't on a particular kind of clock that was academic. It meant that I was going to be measured or evaluated in a different way outside of my publications or my conferences. So that was a very scary moment. I'm going to be very honest about that. But I also knew that despite the risk and the challenges, I think the risk was going to be greater for myself if I didn't take that time. And I was about 2 years out of grad school when I had got to that point. I had completed a year teaching at Oberlin College in Ohio, where I went. So it was like a dream job, super, super excited about that. And also at the time, finishing my postdoc at the University of Illinois. And that spring was really tough. I knew that I needed to take a break. And I had to take a moment and reflect on whether I could keep pushing myself in that direction, even though there were moments where it felt like it wasn't right and that I was really tired, because that's what people around me were doing, right? They were going to conferences and they were working on their projects and they were taking jobs because the market was really tight, at that time. And so I would find myself giving myself pep talk, like, okay, you can do this. This is what you're supposed to be. You're good at this. You love teaching. You love your research. But then it was also a real kind of come to Jesus moment where I said to myself, okay, is this what you really want? Is this something that's going to be best for you? Is this going to be something that's best for your mental health, even if it may not be the best in terms of your professional track? And so I think, like I said, it's a scary moment when you get to that point because you are being asked to imagine yourself outside of who you've been. And I think it's important to, kind of highlight the fact that that decision was not something that I took lightly, and one that I talked to my partner about. And yeah, there were definitely some challenges in terms of the decision to take that year off, because after I finished my postdoc, I moved to Baltimore, which was really great. My partner was there at the time, and so I moved there. And the challenges was that I was not who I was like a month ago. I wasn't teaching, I wasn't affiliated with an institution, so I didn't know how to introduce myself to people. I couldn't say, hi, I'm this person and I work at this institution. And so some of those were challenging moments for me, because I kept having to think about, who am I? Who am I outside of this job? Who am I? What am I interested in? And it really brought me to some really interesting points of reflection, because I realized that my job had defined who I was. And at that point, maybe a part of wanting to step away was realizing that I didn't know who I was anymore.
With that in mind, I would imagine your personal sabbatical sort of transform your schedule. How did it affect your daily schedule? And what are some of the kind of goals you had for yourself and structures that you said, okay, if I'm gonna take a year off, these are the things I want to do in that year, and this is what I need to do it.
Yeah, I mean, Yvette, like you said, what happens when you are suddenly outside of an academic calendar is you realize that you have a lot of free time. I would say free with air quotes there, because you don't have the expectation from people, your colleagues, your students, the institution that you work for to show up, right? To show up to these things and to perform sometimes in that function, right? To perform our jobs. And so, when I moved to Baltimore, that was the summer. And so I wanted to celebrate my freedom in essence, because I suddenly had time to just explore the city. I took a lot of long walks around Lake Montebello and Druid Hill. I really was honestly just kind of celebrating that privilege to be able to kind of, step away. But the weird thing is that after you've been doing something for a really long time, you're still subconsciously on an academic calendar. So everything was really great and gravy until like mid-August, because at that point I realized I started to get very antsy. People around me, my partner included, were, kind of getting ready for the new school year. And then here I was just, kind of on this summer thing. And then all of a sudden I started to get anxious and started to think, okay, the school year is about to start. What am I going to do next? What's going to happen? And I think that's, when I started to turn back to my own research and my book project as a way to ground myself in something that is familiar in a city that was really new to me. I was meeting new people in my community. I was learning about a new city, but I still felt that in many ways, my research was something that was very familiar, like an old friend, right? Like you've been with that project, you've been with that work. So I started to turn to my work as a way to, kind of go back to my project, which was great because I didn't realize that taking time away, even from my research, would give me some new insights. And so that was really nice. I had two rules that year. One was that I would spend time continuing my research, even if I wasn't affiliated with an institution, because I believe that my project, I saw it as my soul project, as something that was, really critical and important. And I wanted to be able to continue that work. And so I actually, once that fall semester started and everybody was going back to work and going back to school, I also started to go back to work and would travel between Baltimore and DC on the mark, and I would go to the National Archives NARA 1, and I would, spend mornings and afternoons doing some research and then come back to Baltimore. And then the other thing that I wanted to do that year, and that I said that I promised myself that I would do, is that I would try something new, that I would do something that I wouldn't have imagined or thought about doing because either my schedule didn't allow it or work didn't allow it. And that's actually how I found Estelle at the Greater Baltimore Urban League, which is where, in many ways, I spent a lot of that year at that organization as a volunteer and learning and meeting new people. So it was the two things that I promised myself I would do during that year off.
So I wanted to ask you a broader question. So how do you think that your personal sabbatical affected your career trajectory?
Oh, that is a really big, broad, heavy question. I didn't know at the time what that year was going to mean. I think in the short term, I knew what I wanted, and I kind of had a sense of what I was hoping I would get out of it. When I look back on it now, that's about, almost 5 years ago. I see it as a really transformational moment, because without that year, I really wouldn't be doing any of the things I don't think that I'm doing right now. When I think about that year off. At that time, it was like, okay, so you have this time, you want to be productive, you want to think about next plans. But now when I look back on it, it gave me the opportunity to think about things that I would otherwise not have an opportunity to think about. So like I said, being a volunteer was one of those things. And it made me also think about the thing you brought up in one of your episodes with the quadrants. Stephen Covey's like quadrants about all these things that you need to be thinking about that are important, but often don't have the time to do, right? So when I look at that year, it really transformed everything. It made me think about whether I wanted to continue teaching or wanted to do a tenure track, which I got to a place where I felt like maybe that's not where I wanted to go. Working with community and working with nonprofits made me realize that that was something that was really important to me and something that I had a love for, but I think wasn't awakened until I was actually in the community doing that work. I know that in in academia and higher ed, we talk about community-based learning, right? Like being, engaging our students with community. But sometimes as instructors or as educators, we don't have that opportunity in the same way. And so Estelle, I am an advocate for college access. I'm a first generation college student. And so being able to focus on something that I really cared about was really critical in sort of refocusing that compass to give me an opportunity to think about things that I wanted to be able to do. And now I am doing, I'm at the particular point where I feel like I'm doing a lot of things that I love. So I'm teaching, and that has been really great. And I have my business, or I get to work with nonprofits, but then I'm also serving on nonprofits. And I know in my heart that if I didn't have that time for reflection, that I wouldn't have kind of dug that deep enough to realize that that was something that was really important to me, and it was meaningful. It was meaningful to me. Teaching is meaningful in one way, right? Serving in community is another way that you can do meaningful work. And so I point to this thing back here because the year that I took the personal sabbatical actually lasted longer than a year. And what happened was I started reading The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. And I realized that I was a person that often said no to things. I think this is just my general demeanor. Somebody will ask me to do something. They'll say, oh, come give a talk. And I'll say no, or, come do this. And I'll say no. And then I read this book, and it was really kind of the second step to that process of the sabbatical, where I said, well, if you're going to take this time and do true self-reflection, but you keep saying no to things that will introduce you to new people and new communities and to things that, are new to you, then what is the point of that, right? So then after reading the book, I said, okay, I'm going to say yes, but judiciously and carefully. And it really changed everything. And I mean, I have it up here to just, in my office to remind me, but it's really true. Like I can imagine myself 5 years ago, you asking me to be a part of this, and I would have said probably no, not because I didn't want to do it, just because it was for me, it's the easier way out. But the Year of Yes, and continuing that personal growth and that journey, that second bit of it was kind of saying yes to different things. Yes to going back to teaching, but not in the tenure tracks. So that I had a little bit more control about, what that looked like for me, and saying yes to, serving on a board, and, being a part of a community for the first time, and, seeing less of the things that might be scary or challenging, but actually saying, okay, yes to that. It's very scary to say yes. But I can't think of a no. That was the rule in the book, right? Like you have to really think of a no. And when I couldn't get to a no, I had to say yes. And there are moments where I felt like, okay, this is really outside of who I am and what I would be comfortable with. But then I would say yes, and I would do it, and then it would be great, and it would be wonderful. And And then I have to remind myself like just how grateful I am for those opportunities that I got to be a part of, because I was more open and more ready, and because I had a different focus on what I felt was important and meaningful for me.
I had a question in mind, and you sort of answered it. The question I had in mind was, okay, you take a year off to find something more meaningful, and how do you maintain that when you get busy again?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get to a place where you have a better sense of who you are and a better sense of what's important, what is when opportunities come up, or where things come up, it's easier to make a determination about whether that's something that you say yes to or not. And I think that's why that moment of kind of saying, okay, I have to say yes, I have to do it judiciously, it has to align with some of the things that are important to me.
And we just have time for a very quick answer to one more question.
Okay.
And so it's Maria Paz's choice. So you can either tell us how is it that you're maintaining your some sense of optimism through COVID, or you can just answer a more a freewheeling question about sharing anything else that you think our listeners would benefit from.
Can I just do a quick answer on both? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think that people should think about some kind of personal sabbatical at some point, and it doesn't have to be a year. It doesn't have to be 6 years. It could be spring break, it could be fall break. I think the personal sabbatical is about checking in with yourself, and paying attention to like how you're feeling, and taking stock of what's happening around you, because it's so hard to do that when there's so many demands on your time, especially when it's like an academic semester and you're teaching and you're doing all of the things that faculty are expected to do. So I think that's a good segue into the question about COVID, because 2020 has just been, it's been a really, really tough year. This year of COVID has been a challenge. And I think that my way of taking care of myself is listening to my mind and listening to my body. And so really kind of checking in and saying, okay, you're tired, you need a nap. So you're going to take a nap, even if you don't take naps, or, even kind of saying like, the stress level is really high, so I need to take a walk, or I need to step away, and giving yourself permission to do that, because this past year has been really hard, and with all of the things that we're having to manage, and for all the things that we're having to be to everyone, right, in our families and at work and our community, I think it's hard to make that check-in. But I don't want people to wait until life makes you slow down and stops you to make you do that check-in. If there are moments in the day, journaling, taking a walk, those kinds of things, I think can go a long way. Whatever is your outlet to take a break and check in, I think is really critical, because this can keep going for a little bit longer, and we really need to make sure we're putting our oxygen mask on first.
Well, very well said, and thank you so much. I think you're going to help so many people. You helped me, and I think you're going to help so many other people. I love that about a personal sabbatical. I think in higher education, well, I did a sabbatical when I was full-time professor. We wait for college to get approval. We put an application, but you can take your own. You don't need a college to say you can take a sabbatical.